Chapter 37, 38, and 39 of Don Quixote Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by David Shep. Don Quixote Volume 2 by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Translated by John Ormsby. Chapter 37. Wherein is continued the notable adventure of the distressed duenna. The Duke and Duchess were extremely glad to see how readily Don Quixote fell in with their scheme, but at the moment Sancho observed, "I hope the Señora Duenna won't be putting any difficulties in the way of the promise of my government, for I have heard a Toledo apothecary, who talked like a goldfinch, say that where duennas are mixed up nothing good could happen. God bless me, how he hated them, that same apothecary. And so what I'm thinking is, if all duennas, of whatever sort or condition they may be, are plagues and busybodies, what must they be that are distressed, like this Countess Three-Skirts or Three-Tails? For in my country, skirts or tails, tails or skirts, it's all one." "Hush, friend Sancho," said Don Quixote, "since this lady duenna comes in quest of me from such a distant land, she cannot be one of those the apothecary meant. Moreover, this is a countess, and when countesses serve as duennas, it is in the service of queens and empresses, for in their own houses they are mistresses paramount, and have other duennas to wait on them." To this, Dona Rodriguez, who was present, made answer, "My lady, the Duchess has duennas in her service that might be countesses, if it were the will of fortune. But laws go as kings like. Let nobody speak ill of duennas, above all of ancient maiden ones, for though I am not one myself, I know and am aware of the advantage a maiden duenna has over one that is a widow. But he who clipped us has kept the scissors." "For all that," said Sancho, "there is so much to be clipped about duennas, so my barber said, that it will be better not to stir the rice, even though it sticks." "These squires," returned Dona Rodriguez, "are always enemies, and as they are the haunting spirits of the antechamber and watch us at every step, whenever they are not saying their prayers, and that's often enough, they spend their time in tattling about us, digging up our bones and burying our good name. But I can tell these walking blocks that we will live in spite of them, and in great houses too, though we die of hunger and cover our flesh, be it delicate or not, with widow's weeds, as one covers or hides a dunghill on procession day. By my faith, if it were permitted me, and time allowed, I could prove, not only to those here present, but to all the world, that there is no virtue that is not to be found in a duenna." "I have no doubt," said the Duchess, "that my good Dona Rodriguez is right, and very much so. But she had better bide her time for fighting her own battle and that of the rest of the duennas, so as to crush the calumny of the vile apothecary, and root out the prejudice in the great Sancho Panza's mind." To which Sancho replied, "Ever since I have sniffed the governorship, I have got rid of the humours of a squire, and I don't care a wild fig for all the duennas in the world." They would have carried on this duenna dispute further, had they not heard the notes of the fife and drums once more, from which they concluded that the distressed duenna was making her entrance. The Duchess asked the Duke if it would be proper to go out to receive her, as she was a countess and a person of rank. "In respect of her being a countess," said Sancho, before the Duke could reply, "I am for your highness going out to receive her, but in respect of her being a duenna, it is my opinion you should not stir a step." "Who bade thee meddle in this, Sancho?" said Don Quixote. "Who, señor?" said Sancho. "I meddle, for I have a right to meddle. As a squire who has learned the rules of courtesy in the school of your worship, the most courteous and best bred knight in the whole world of courtliness, and in these things, as I have heard your worship say, as much is lost by a card too many as by a card too few. And to one who has his ears open, few words." "Sancho is right," said the Duke. "We'll see what the countess is like, and by that measure the courtesy that is due to her." And now the drums and the fife made their entrance as before, and here the author brought his sort of chapter to an end, and began the next, following up the same adventure, which is one of the most notable in the history. Chapter 38. wherein is told the distressed duenna's tale of her misfortunes. Following the melancholy musicians, there filed into the garden as many as 12 duennas in 2 lines, all dressed in ample mourning robes, apparently of milled serge, with hoods of fine white gauze so long that they allowed only the border of the robe to be seen. Behind them came the Countess Trifaldi, the Squire Trifaldin of the Whitebeard leading her by the hand, clad in the finest unnapped black baize, such that, had it a nap, every tuft would have shown as big as the Mardos chickpea. The tail, or skirt, or whatever it might be called, ended in 3 points, which were borne up by the hands of the 3 pages, likewise dressed in mourning, forming an elegant geometrical figure with the 3 acute angles made by the 3 points, from which all who saw the peaked skirt concluded that it must be because of it the Countess was called Trifaldi, as though it were Countess of the 3 skirts, and Bengali says it was so, and that by her right name she was called the Countess Lubona, because wolves bred in great numbers in her country, and if, instead of wolves, they had been foxes, she would have been called the Countess Zerona, as it was the custom in those parts for lords to take distinctive titles from the thing or things most abundant in their dominions. This countess, however, in honour of the new fashion of her skirt, dropped Lubona and took up Trifaldi. The 12 duennas and the lady came on at procession pace, their faces being covered with black veils, not transparent ones like Trifaldin's, but so close that they allowed nothing to be seen through them. As soon as the band of duennas was fully in sight, the Duke, the Duchess, and Don Quixote stood up, as well as all who were watching the slow-moving procession. The 12 duennas halted and formed a lane along which the distressed one advanced, Trifaldin still holding her hand. On seeing this, the Duke, the Duchess, and Don Quixote went some 12 paces forward to meet her. She then, kneeling on the ground, said in a voice hoarse and rough rather than fine and delicate, "May it please your highness not to offer such courtesies to your servant. I should say to this your handmaid, for I am in such distress that I shall never be able to make a proper return, because my strange and unparalleled misfortune has carried off my wits, and I know not whither. But it must be a long way off, for the more I look for them, the less I find them." "He would be wanting in wits, Señora Countess," said the Duke, "who did not perceive your worth by your person, for at a glance it may be seen it deserves all the cream of courtesy and flower of polite usage." And raising her up by the hand, he led her to the seat beside the Duchess, who likewise received her in great urbanity. Don Quixote remained silent, while Sancho was dying to see the features of Trifaldi and 1 or 2 of the many other duennas, but there was no possibility of it until they themselves displayed them of their own accord and free will. All kept still, waiting to see who would break the silence, which the distressed duenna did in these words: "I am confident, most mighty lord, most fair lady, and most discreet company, that my most miserable misery will be accorded a reception no less dispassionate than generous and condolent in your most valiant bosoms, for it is one that is enough to melt marble, soften diamonds, and mollify the steel of the most hardened hearts in the world. But ere it is proclaimed to your hearing, not to say your ears, I would fain be enlightened whether there be present in this society, circle, or company, that knight emasculinissimus, Don Quixote de la Manchísima, and his squarissimus Panza." "The Panza is here," said Sancho, before anyone could reply, "and Don Quixotissimus too, and so, most distressedest duennissima, you may say what you willissimus, for we are all readyissimus to do your servissimus." On this Don Quixote rose, and addressing the distressed duenna, said, "If your sorrows, afflicted lady, can indulge in any hope of relief from the valour or might of any knight errant, here are mine, which, feeble and limited though they be, shall be entirely devoted to your service. I am Don Quixote of La Mancha, whose calling it is to give aid to the needy of all sorts, and that being so, it is not necessary for you, señora, to make any appeal to benevolence, or deal in preambles, only to tell your woes plainly and straightforwardly, for you have hearers that will know how, if not to remedy them, to sympathize with them." On hearing this, the distressed duenna made as though she would throw herself at Don Quixote's feet, and actually did fall before them, and said, as she strove to embrace them, "Before these feet and legs I cast myself, O unconquered knight, as before, that they are the foundations and pillars of knight-errantry. These feet I desire to kiss, for upon their steps hangs and depends the sole remedy of my misfortune. O valorous errant, whose veritable achievements leave behind and eclipse the fabulous ones of the Amandates, Esplandians, and Belandices. Then turning to Panza, and grasping his hands, she said, O thou most loyal squire that ever served knight-errant in his present age or ages past, whose goodness is more extensive than the beard of Trifaldin, my companion here of present, well mayest thou boast thyself that in serving the great Don Quixote thou art serving, summed up in one, the whole host of knights that have ever borne arms in the world. I conjure thee, by what thou owest to thy most loyal goodness, that thou wilt become my kind intercessor with thy master, that he speedily give aid to this most humble and most unfortunate countess. To this Sancho made answer, As to my goodness, señora, being as long and as great as your squire's beard, it matters very little to me. May I have my soul well bearded and mustached when it comes to quit this life, that's the point. About beards here below I care little or nothing, but without all these blandishments and prayers, I will beg my master, for I know he loves me, and besides he has need of me just now for a certain business, to help and aid your worship as far as he can. Unpack your woes and lay them before us, and leave us to deal with them, for we'll be all of one mind. The Duke and Duchess, as it was they who made the experiment of this adventure, were ready to burst with laughter at all this, and between themselves they commended the clever acting of the Trifaldi, who, returning to her seat, said, Queen Donna Magnuccia reigned over the famous kingdom of Kandy, which lies between the great Trapobana and the southern sea, 2 leagues beyond Cape Comorin. She was the widow of King Archipela, her lord and husband, and of their marriage they had issue, the Princess Antonomasia, heiress to the kingdom, which Princess Antonomasia was reared and brought up under my care and direction, I being the oldest and highest in rank of her mother's duennas. Time passed, and the young Antonomasia reached the age of 14, and such a perfection of beauty that nature could not raise it higher. Then it must not be supposed her intelligence was childish. She was as intelligent as she was fair, and she was fairer than all the world, and is so still, unless the envious fates and hard-hearted sisters 3 have cut for her the thread of life, but that they have not. For heaven will not suffer so great a wrong to earth, as it would be to pluck unripe the grapes of the fairest vineyard on its surface. Of this beauty, to which my poor feeble tongue has failed to do justice, countless princes, not only of that country, but of others, were enamoured, and among them a private gentleman, who was at the court, dared to raise his thoughts to the heaven of so great beauty, trusting his youth, his gallant bearing, his numerous accomplishments and graces, and his quickness and readiness of wit. For I tell your highnesses, if I am not wearying you, that he played the guitar so as to make it speak, and he was, besides, a poet and a great dancer, and he could make birdcages so well that by making them alone he might have gained a livelihood had he found himself reduced to utter poverty. And gifts and graces of this kind are enough to bring down a mountain, not to say a tender young girl. But all his gallantry, wit, and gaiety, all his graces and accomplishments would have been to little or no avail towards gaining the fortress of my pupil, had not the impudent thief taken the precaution of gaining me over first. First, the villain and heartless vagabond sought to win my goodwill, and purchase my compliance, so as to get me, like a treacherous warder, to deliver up to him the keys of the fortress I had in charge. In a word, he gained an influence over my mind, and overcame my resolutions with I know not what trinkets and jewels he gave me, but it was some verse I heard him singing one night from the grating that opened on the street where he lived, that more than anything else made me give way and lead to my fall, and if I remember rightly, they ran thus: From that sweet enemy of mine my bleeding heart hath had its wound, and to increase the pain I am bound to suffer, and to make no sign. The line seemed pearls to me, and his voice sweet as syrup, and afterwards I may say, ever since then, looking at this misfortune into which I have fallen, I have thought that poets, as Plato advised, ought to be banished from all well-ordered states, at least the amatory ones, for they write verses not like those of the Marquis of Mancha, that delight and draw tears from women and children, but sharp-pointed conceits that pierce the heart like soft thorns, and like the lightning strike, leaving the raiment uninjured. Another time he sang, "Come, death, so subtly veiled, that I thy coming know not, how or when, lest it should give me life again, to find how sweet it is to die." And other verses and burdens of the same sort, such as enchantment when sung and fascinate when written. And then, when they condescended to compose a sort of verse that was at that time in vogue in Candy, which they called sigillas, then it is that hearts leap and laughter breaks forth, and the body grows restless, and all the senses turn quicksilver. And so I say, sirs, that these troubadours richly deserve to be banished to the Isles of the Lizards, though it is not they that are at fault, but the simpletons that extol them, and the fools that believe in them. And had I been the faithful duenna I should have been, his stale conceits would have never moved me, nor should I have been taken in by such phrases as "in death I live," "in ice I burn," "in flames I shiver," "hopeless I hope," and "go I stay," and paradoxes of that sort which their writings are full of. And then when they promise the phoenix of Arabia, the crown of Adrian, the horses of the sun, the pearls of the south, the gold of Tybar, and the psalms of Panchaea, then it is they give a loose to their pens, for it costs them little to make promises they have no intention or power of fulfilling. But where am I wandering to? Woe is me, unfortunate being! What madness or folly leads me to speak of the faults of others when there is so much to be said of my own? Again, woe is me, hapless that I am! It was not verses that conquered me, but my own simplicity. It was not music made me yield, but my own imprudence, my own great ignorance. A little caution opened the way and cleared the path for Don Clivo's advances, for that was the name of the gentleman I have referred to, and so, with my help as go-between, he found his way many a time into the chamber of the deceived Antonomasia, deceived not by him, but by me, under the title of a lawful husband, for, sinner though I was, would not have allowed him to approach the edge of her shoe-sole without being her husband. No, not that. Marriage must come first in any business of this sort that I take in hand. But there was one hitch in the case, which was that of inequality of rank. Don Clivo being a private gentleman, and the Princess Antonomasia, as I said, heiress to the kingdom, the entanglement remained for some time a secret, kept hidden by my cunning precautions until I perceived that a certain expansion of waste in Antonomasia must before long disclose it, the dread of which made us all there take counsel together. And it was agreed that before the mischief came to light, Don Clivo should demand Antonomasia for his wife, before the vicar, in virtue of an agreement to marry him made by the princess and drafted by my wit, in such binding terms that the might of Samson could not have broken it. The necessary steps were taken. The vicar saw the agreement and took the lady's confession. She confessed everything in full, and he ordered her into the custody of a very worthy alguacil of the court. "There are alguacils of the court in Candy too?" said Sancho at this, "and poets and segudillas? I swear I think the world is the same all over. But make haste, Señora Trifaldi, for it is late, and I am dying to know the end of this long story." "I will," replied the countess. Chapter 39, in which the Trifaldi continues her marvellous and memorable story. By every word that Sancho uttered, the duchess was as much delighted as Don Quixote was driven to desperation. He bade him hold his tongue, and the distressed one went on to say, "At length, after much questioning and answering, as the princess held to her story, without changing her or varying her previous declaration, the vicar gave his decision in favour of Don Clivo, and she was delivered over to him as his lawful wife, which Queen Donna Magnuccia, the Princess Antomasia's mother, so took to heart that within the space of 3 days we buried her." "She died, no doubt," said Sancho. "Of course," said Trifaldin. "They don't bury the living people in Candy, only the dead." "Señor Squire," said Sancho, "a man in a swoon has been known to be buried before now, in the belief that he was dead, and it struck me that Queen Magnusia ought to have swooned rather than died, because with life a great many things come right, and the princess's folly was not so great that she need feel it so keenly. If the lady had married some page of hers, or some other servant of the house, as many another had done, so I have heard say, then the mischief would have been past curing. But to marry such an elegant, accomplished gentleman as has been just now described to us, indeed, though it was a folly, it was not such a great one as you'd think, for according to the rules of my master here, and he won't allow me to lie, as of men of letters bishops are made, so of gentlemen knights, especially if they are errant knights, and emperors may be made." "Thou art right, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "for with a knight errant, if he has but 2 fingers' breadth of good fortune, it is on the cards to become the mightiest lord on earth. But let Señora, the distressed one, proceed, for I suspect she has got yet to tell us the bitter part of this so far sweet story." "The bitter is indeed to come," said the countess, "and such bitter that Solianth is sweet, and Oleander toothsome in comparison. The queen, then, being dead, and not in a swoon, we buried her, and hardly had we covered her with earth, hardly had we said our last farewells, when quis talia fondo temperant a lachissimus, over the queen's grave there appeared, mounted upon a wooden horse, the giant Malambruno, Magnuccia's first cousin, who, besides being cruel, is an errant enchanter, and he, to revenge the death of his cousin, punished the audacity of Don Clivo, and in wrath at the Count Macy of Antomasia, left them both enchanted by his art on the grave itself, she being changed into an ape of brass, and he into a horrible crocodile of some unknown metal, while between the two there stands a pillar, also of metal, with certain characters in the Cyrenaic language inscribed upon it, which, being translated into Candian, and now into Castilian, contain the following sentence: These 2 rash lovers shall not recover their former shape until the valiant Michigan comes to do battle with me in single combat, for the fates reserve this unexampled adventure for the mighty valor alone. This done, he drew from its sheath a huge broad scimitar, and seizing me by the hair, he made as though he meant to cut my throat and shear my head clean off. I was terror-stricken, my voice stuck in my throat, and I was in the deepest distress. Nevertheless, I summoned up my strength as well as I could, and in a trembling and pious voice I addressed such words to him as induced him to stay the infliction of a punishment so severe. He then caused all the duennas of the palace, those that are here present, to be brought before him, and after having dwelt upon the enormity of our offence, and denounced duennas, their characters, their evil ways, and worse intrigues, laying to the charge of all what I alone was guilty of, he said he would not visit us with capital punishment, but with others of a slow nature, which would be in effect civil death forever. And the very instant he ceased speaking, we all felt the pores of our faces opening and prickling us as if with the points of needles. We at once put our hands up to our faces and found ourselves in the state you now see." Here the distressed one and the other duennas raised their veils with which they were covered, and disclosed countenances all bristling with beards, some red, some black, some white, and some grizzled, at which spectacle the Duke and Duchess made a show of being filled with wonder. Don Quixote and Sancho were overwhelmed with amazement, and the bystanders lost in astonishment, while the Trifaldi went on to say, "Thus did the benevolent villain Malambruno punish us, covering the tenderness and softness of our faces with these rough bristles. Would to heaven that he had swept off our heads with this enormous scimitar, instead of obscuring the light of our countenances with these wool combings that cover us. For if we look into the matter, sirs, and what I am now going to say I would say with eyes flowing like fountains, only that the thought of our misfortunes and the oceans they have already wept keep them as dry as barley spears, and so I say it without tears. Where, I ask, can a duenna with a beard two? What father or mother will feel pity for her Who will help her? For if even when she has a smooth skin and a face tortured by 1,000 kinds of washes and cosmetics, she can hardly get anybody to love her, what will she do when she shows a countenance turned into a thicket? O duennas, companions mine, it was an unlucky moment when we were born, and an ill-starred hour when our fathers begot us." And as she said this, she showed signs of being about to faint. End of chapter 39. Recording by David Shep from Los Angeles.
'41 of Don Quixote, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Brian von Diedenroth. Don Quixote, Volume 2, by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Translated by John Ormsby. Chapter 40. Of matters relating and belonging to this adventure and to this memorable history. Verily and truly, all those who find pleasure in histories like this ought show their gratitude to Cide Hamete, its original author, for the scrupulous care he has given to set before us all its minute particulars, not leaving anything, however trifling it may be, that he does not make clear and plain. He portrays the thoughts, he reveals the fancies, he answers implied questions, clears up doubts, sets objections at rest, and, in a word, makes plain the smallest points the most inquisitive can desire to know. O renowned author! O happy Don Quixote! O famous, famous droll Sancho! All and each may ye live countless ages for the delight and amusement of the dwellers on earth. The history goes on to say that when Sancho saw the distressed one faint, he exclaimed, "I swear by the faith of an honest man, in the shades of all my ancestors the Panzas, that never I did see or hear of, nor has my master related or conceived in his mind, such an adventure as this. 1,000 devils, not to curse thee, take thee, Malbruno, for an enchanter and a giant. Couldst thou find no other sort of punishment for these sinners but bearding them? Would it not have been better? It would have been better for them to have taken off half their noses from the middle upwards, even though they'd have snuffled when they spoke, than to have put beards on them. I'll bet that they have not the means of paying anybody to shave them." "That is the truth, senor," said one of the 12. "We have not the money to get ourselves shaved, and so we have, some of us, taken to using sticking plasters by way of an economical remedy. For by applying them to our faces and plucking them off with a jerk, we are left as bare and smooth as the bottom of a stone mortar. There are, to be sure, women in Kandy that go about from house to house to remove down and trim eyebrows and make cosmetics for the use of the women, but we, the duennas of my lady, would never let them in. For most of them have a flavor of agents that have ceased to be principals. And if we are not relieved by Señor Don Quixote, we shall be carried to our graves with beards." "I will pluck out my own in the land of the Moors," said Don Quixote, "if I don't cure yours." At this instant the Trifaldi recovered from her swoon and said, "The chink of that promise, valiant knight, reached my ears in the midst of my swoon, and has been the means of reviving me and bringing me back my senses. And so, once more, I implore you, illustrious errant, indomitable sir, to let your gracious promises be turned into deeds." "There shall be no delay on my part," said Don Quixote. "Bethink you, señora, of what I must do, for my heart is most eager to serve you." "The fact is," replied the distressed one, "it is 5,000 leagues, a couple more or less, from this to the kingdom of Kandy, if you go by land. But if you go through the air and in a straight line, it is 3,227. You must know, too, that Malabruno told me that whenever fate
provided the knight, our deliverer, he himself would send him a steed far better, with less tricks than a post-horse. For he will be that same wooden horse on which the valiant Pierres carried off the fair Magalona, which said horse is guided by a peg he has in his forehead that serves for a bridle, and flies through the air with such rapidity that you would fancy the very devils were carrying him. This horse, according to ancient tradition, was made by Merlin. He lent him to Pierres, who was a friend of his, and who made long journeys with him, and has been said carried off the fair Magalona, bearing her through the air on its haunches, and making all who beheld them from the earth gape with astonishment. And he never lent them, save to those who he loved, or those who paid him well. And since the great Pierres, we know of no one having mounted him until now. From him Malabruno stole him by his magic art, and he has him now in his possession, and makes use of him in his journeys which he constantly makes through different parts of the world. He is here today, tomorrow in France, and the next day in Potosi. And the best of it is, the said horse neither eats nor sleeps nor wears out shoes, and goes at an ambling pace through the air without wings, so that he whom he has mounted upon him can carry a cup full of water in his hand without spilling a drop. So smoothly and easily does he go, for which reason the fair Magalona enjoyed riding him greatly.
"For going smoothly and easily," said Sancho at this, "give me my Dapple. Though he can't go through the air, but on the ground, I'll back him against all the amblers in the world."
They all laughed, and the distressed one continued,
And this same horse, if so be that Malabruno is disposed to put an end to our sufferings, will be here before us ere the night shall have advanced half an hour. For he announced to me that the sign he would give me whereby I might know that I had found the knight I was in quest of, would be to send me the horse wherever he might be, speedily and promptly.
"And how many is there room for on his horse?"
asked Sancho.
2,
said the distressed one.
one in the saddle and the other on the croup, and generally these two are knight and squire, when there is no damsel that's being carried off.
"I'd like to know, Señora Distressed One," said Sancho, "what is the name of this horse?"
His name,
said the distressed one,
is not the same as Bellerophon's horse, that was called Pegasus, or Alexander the Great's, called Bucephalus, or Orlando Furioso's, the name of which was Brigliador, nor yet Bayard, the horse of Reynaldo's of Montalvan, nor Frontino, like Ruggiero's, nor Boots, nor Perutoa, as they say the horses of the sun were called, nor is he called Aurelia, like the horse on which the unfortunate Ruggiero, the last king of the Goths, rode to the battle where he lost his life and his kingdom.
"I'll bet,"
said Sancho,
"that as they have given him none of these famous names of well-known horses, no more have they given him the name of my master's Rocinante, for which being an apt surpasses all that have been mentioned."
That is true,
said the bearded countess.
Still, it fits him very well, for he is called Clavileño the Swift, which name is in accordance with his being made of wood, with the peg he has in his forehead, and with the swift pace at which he travels. And so, as far as name goes, he may compare with the famous Rocinante.
"I have nothing to say against his name," said Sancho, "but with what sort of bridle or halter is he managed?"
I have said already,
said the Trifaldi,
that it is with a peg, by turning which to one side or the other, the knight who rides him makes him go as he pleases, either through the upper air, or skimming and almost sweeping the earth, or else in that middle course that is sought and followed in all well-regulated proceedings.
"I'd like to see him,"
said Sancho,
"but to fancy I'm going to mount him, either in the saddle or on the croup, is to ask pears of the elm tree. A good joke, indeed. I can hardly keep my seat upon Dapple, and on a pack saddle softer than silk itself. And here They'd have me hold on upon haunches of plank without a pad or a cushion of any sort? Gad, I have no notion of bruising myself to get rid of anyone's beard. Let each one shave himself as best he can. I'm not going to accompany my master on any such long journey. Besides, I can't give any help to the shaving of these beards, as I can to the disenchantment of my lady Dulcinea."
"Yes, you can, my friend," replied the Trifaldi, "and so much, that without you, so I understand, we shall be able to do nothing."
"In the king's name!"
exclaimed Sancho.
"What have squires got to do with the adventures of their masters? Are they to have the fame of such as they go through, and we the labor? Body o' me, if the historians would only say, such and such a knight finished such and such an adventure, but with the help of so-and-so, his squire, without which it would have been impossible for him to accomplish it. But they write curtly, Don Paralipomenon of the 3 Stars accomplished the adventure of the 6 monsters without mentioning such a person as his squire, who was there all the time, just as if there was no such being. Once more, sirs, I say my master may go alone, and such good may it do him, and I'll stay here in the company of my lady the Duchess. And maybe, when he comes back, he will find the lady Dulcinea's affair ever so much advanced. For I mean in leisure hours, and at idle moments, to give myself a spell of whipping without so much as a hair to cover me."
"For all that you must go, if it be necessary, my good Sancho," said the Duchess, "for they are worthy folk who ask you, and the faces of these ladies must not remain overgrown in this way, because of your idle fears. That would be a hard case indeed."
"In the king's name once more,"
said Sancho.
"if this charitable work were to be done for the sake of damsels in confinement, or charity girls, a man might expose himself to such hardships, but to bear it for the sake of stripping beards of duennas? Devil take it! I'd sooner see them all bearded, from the highest to the lowest, and from the most prudish to the most affected."
"You are very hard on duennas, Sancho, my friend," said the Duchess. "You incline very much to the opinion of the Toledo apothecary. But indeed you are wrong. There are duennas in my house that may serve as patterns of duennas, and here is my Doña Rodriguez, who will not allow me to say otherwise."
"Your excellence may say it if you like,"
said the Rodriguez,
"for God knows the truth of everything, and whether we duennas are good or bad, bearded or smoothed, we are our mother's daughters like other women, and as God sent us into the world, he knows why he did, and on his mercy I rely, and not on anybody's beard."
"Well, Signora Rodriguez, Signora Trifaldi, and present company,"
said Don Quixote,
"I trust in heaven that it will look with kindly eyes upon your troubles, for Sancho will do as I bid him. Only let Clavileño come and let me find myself face to face with Malabruno, and I am certain no razor will shave you more easily than my sword shall shave Malabruno's head off his shoulders. For God bears with the wicked, but not forever."
exclaimed the distressed one at this.
"May all the stars of the celestial regions look down upon your greatness with benign eyes, valiant knight, and shed every prosperity and valor upon your heart, that it may be the shield and safeguard of the abused and downtrodden race of duennas, detested by apothecaries, sneered at by squires, and made game of by pages. Ill betide the jade that in the flower of her youth would not sooner become a nun than a duenna. Unfortunate beings that we are, we duennas, though we may be descended in the direct male line from Hector of Troy himself, our mistresses never fail to address us as you, if they think it makes queens of them. O giant Malabruno, thou art an enchanter. Thou art true to thy promises. Send us now the peerless Clavileño, that our misfortune may be brought to an end. For if the hot weather sets in and these beards of ours are still there, alas for our lot."
The Trifaldi said this in such a pathetic way that she drew tears from the eyes of all, and even Sancho's filled up, and he resolved in his heart to accompany his master to the uttermost ends of the earth, if so be the removal of the wool from those venerable countenances depended upon it. End of chapter 40. Chapter 41. Of the arrival of Clavileño and the end of this protracted adventure. And now night came, and with it the appointed time for the arrival of the famous horse Clavileño, the non-appearance of which was already beginning to make Don Quixote uneasy, for it struck him that, as Malambruno was so long about sending it, either he himself was not the knight for whom the adventure was reserved, or else Malambruno did not dare to meet him in single combat. But lo! Suddenly there came into the garden 4 wild men, all clad in green ivy, bearing on their shoulders a great wooden horse. They placed it on his feet on the ground, and one of the wild men said,
"Let the knight who has heart for it mount this machine."
Here Sancho exclaimed,
I don't mount, for neither have I the heart, nor am I a knight.
"And let the squire, if he has one,"
continued the wild man,
"take his seat on the croup, and let him trust the valiant Malambruno, for by no sword save his, nor by the malice of any other, shall he be assailed. It is but to turn this peg the horse has in his neck, and he will bear them through the air to where Malambruno awaits them. But lest the vast elevation of their course should make them giddy, their eyes must be covered until the horse neighs, which will be the sign of their having completed their journey."
With these words, leaving Clavileño behind them, they retired with easy dignity the way they came. As soon as the distressed one saw the horse, almost in tears, she exclaimed to Don Quixote,
"Valiant knight, the promise of Malambruno has proved trustworthy. The horse is come. Our beards are growing, and by every hair in them, all of us implore thee to shave and shear us, as it is only mounting him with thy squire, and making a happy beginning with your new journey."
"That I will, Señora Countess Trifaldi,"
said Don Quixote.
"most gladly, and with right good will, without stopping to take a cushion or put on my spurs, so as not to lose time. Such is my desire to see you and all these duennas shaved clean."
That I won't, said Sancho, with good will or bad will, or any way at all. And if this shaving can't be done without my mounting on the croup, my master had better look out for another squire to go with him, and these ladies for some other way of making their faces smooth. I'm no witch to have a taste for travelling through the air. What would my islanders say when they heard their governor was going strolling about on the winds? And another thing, as it is 3,000 and odd leagues from this to Kandy, if the horse tires, or the giant takes off, we'll be a half-dozen years getting back, and there won't be isle or island in the world that will know me. And so, as it is a common saying, in delay there's danger, and when they offer thee a heifer, run with a halter. These ladies' beards must excuse me. Saint Peter is very well in Rome. I mean, I am very well in this house here. So much is made of me, and I hope for such a good thing from the master as to see myself a governor.
"Friend Sancho," said the Duke at this, "the island that I have promised you is not a moving one, or one that will run away. It has roots so deeply buried in the bowels of the earth that it will be no easy matter to pluck it up or shift it from where it is. You know as well as I do that there is no sort of office of any importance that is not obtained by a bribe of some kind, great or small. Well then, that which I took to receive for this government is that you go with your master, Don Quixote, and bring this memorable adventure to a conclusion. And whether you return on Clavileño as quickly as his speed seems to promise, or adverse fortune brings you back on foot travelling as a pilgrim from hostel to hostel and from inn to inn, you will always find your island on your return, where you left it, and your islanders in the same eagerness they have always had to receive you as their governor. And my goodwill will remain the same. Doubt not the truth of this, Señor Sancho, for that would be grievously wronging my disposition to serve you.
Say no more, señor, said Sancho. I am a poor squire, and not equal to carrying so much courtesy. Let my master mount, bandage my eyes, and commit me to God's care, and tell me if I may commend myself to our Lord, or call upon the angels to protect me when we go towering up there.
To this the Trifaldi made answer,
Sancho, you may freely command yourself to God or whom you will, for Malabruno, though an enchanter, is a Christian, and works his enchantments with great circumspection, taking very good care not to fall out with anyone.
Well then, said Sancho, God and the most holy trinity of Gaeta, give me help.
Since the memorable adventure of the fulfilling mills,
said Don Quixote,
I have never seen Sancho in such a fright as now. Were I as superstitious as others, his abject fear would cause me some little trepidation of spirit. But come here, Sancho, for with the leave of these gentles, I would say a word or two to thee in private.
And, drawing Sancho aside among the trees of the garden, and seizing both his hands, he said,
Thou seest, brother Sancho, the long journey we have before us, and God knows when we shall return, or what leisure or opportunities this business will allow us. I wish thee, therefore, to retire now to thy chamber, as though thou wert going to fetch something required for the road, and in a trice give thyself, if it be, only 500 lashes on account of 3,300 to which thou art bound. It will be all to the good, and to make a beginning with a thing is to have it half finished.
By God,
said Sancho,
but your worship must be out of your senses. This is like the common saying. You see me with child, and you want me a virgin. Just as I'm about to go sitting on a bare board, your worship would have me score my backside. Indeed, your worship is not reasonable. Let us be off to shave these duennas, and on our return I promise on my word to make such haste to wipe off all that's due as will satisfy your worship. I can't say more.
Well, I will comfort myself with that promise, my good Sancho,
replied Don Quixote,
and I believe thou wilt keep it, for indeed, though stupid, thou art voracious.
I'm not voracious, said Sancho, only peckish. But even if I was a little, still, I'd keep my word.
With this, they went back to Mount Clavileño, and as they were about to do so, Don Quixote said,
Cover thine eyes, Sancho, and mount. For one who sends for us from lands so far distant cannot mean to deceive us for the sake of the paltry glory to be derived from deceiving persons who trust in him. Though all should turn out the contrary of what I hope, no malice will be able to dim the glory of having undertaken this exploit.
Let us be off, señor, said Sancho, for I have taken the beards and tears of these ladies deeply to heart, and I shan't eat a bit to relish it until I have seen them restored to their former smoothness. Mount, your worship, and blindfold yourself, for if I am to go on the croup, it is plain the rider in the saddle must mount first.
That is true,
said Don Quixote, and taking a handkerchief out of his pocket, he begged the distressed one to bandage his eyes very carefully. But after having them bandaged, he uncovered them again, saying,
If my memory does not deceive me, I have read in Virgil of the Palladium of Troy, a wooden horse the Greeks offered to the goddess Pallas, which was big with armed knights, who were afterwards the destruction of Troy. So it would be as well to see, first of all, what Clavileño has in his stomach.
There is no occasion,
said the distressed one.
I will be bail for him, and I know that Malabruno has nothing tricky or treacherous about him. You may mount without fear, Señor Don Quixote. On my head be it, if any harm befalls you."
Don Quixote thought that to say anything further with regard to his safety would be putting his courage in an unfavorable light, and so, without more words, he mounted Clavileño and tried the peg, which turned easily, and as he had no stirrups and his legs hung down, he looked like nothing so much as a figure in some Roman triumph painted or embroidered on a Flemish tapestry. Much against the grain, and very slowly, Sancho proceeded to mount, and after settling himself as well as he could on the croup, found it rather hard, and not at all soft, and asked the Duke if it would be possible to oblige him with a pad of some kind, or a cushion, even if it were off the couch of his lady the Duchess, or the bed of one of the pages, as the haunches of that horse were more like marble than wood. On this the Trifaldi observed that Clavileño would not bear any kind of harness or trappings, and that his best plan would be to sit sideways like a woman, as in that way he could not feel the hardness so much. Sancho did so, and bidding them farewell, allowed his eyes to be bandaged, but immediately afterwards uncovered them again, and looking tenderly and tearfully on those in the garden, bade them help him in his present strait with plenty of Pater Nosters and Ave Marias, that God might provide someone to say as many for them whenever they found themselves in a similar emergency. At this Don Quixote exclaimed,
"Art thou on the gallows, thief? Or at thy last moment to use pitiful entreaties of that sort? Cowardly, spiritless creature! Art thou not in the very place the fair Magalona occupied, and from which she descended not into the grave, but to become Queen of France, unless the histories lie? And I, who am here beside thee, may I not put myself on par with the valiant Pierre, who pressed this very spot that I now press? Cover thine eyes, abject animal, and let not thy fear escape thy lips, at least in my presence."
"Blindfold me," said Sancho, "as you won't let me commend myself or be commended to God. Is it any wonder if I am afraid there is a region of devils about here that will carry us off to Peravillo?"
They were then blindfolded, and Don Quixote, finding himself settled to his satisfaction, felt for the peg, and the instant he placed his fingers on it, all the duennas and all who stood by lifted up their voices, exclaiming,
"God guide thee, valiant knight! God be with thee, intrepid squire! Now ye go cleaving the air more swiftly than an arrow. Now ye begin to amaze and astonish all who are gazing at you from the earth. Take care not to wobble about, valiant Sancho! Mind thou, fall not, for thy fall will be worse than that rash youth's who tried to steer the chariot of his father the sun."
As Sancho heard the voices, clinging tightly to his master and winding his arms round him, he said,
"Señor, how do they make out we are going up so high, if their voices reach us here, and they seem to be speaking quite close to us?"
"Don't mind that, Sancho,"
said Don Quixote.
"for as affairs of this sort, and flights like this are out of the common course of things, you can see and hear as much as you like 1,000 leagues off. But don't squeeze me so tight, or thou wilt upset me. And really I know not what thou hast to be uneasy or frightened at. For I can safely swear I never mounted a smoother going steed all the days of my life. One would fancy we never stirred from one place. Banish fear, my friend, for indeed everything is going as it ought, and we have the wind astern."
"It's true," said Sancho, "for such a strong wind comes against me on this side that it seems as if people were blowing on me with 1,000 pair of bellows."
Which was the case. They were puffing at him with a great pair of bellows, for the whole adventure was so well planned by the Duke, the Duchess, and their major domo, that nothing was omitted to make it perfectly successful. Don Quixote, now feeling the blast, said,
"Beyond a doubt, Sancho, we must have already reached the second region of the air, where the hail and the snow are generated. The thunder, the lightning, and the thunderbolts are engendered in the third region, and if we go on ascending at this rate, we shall shortly plunge into the region of fire, and I know not how to regulate this peg, so as not to mount up where we shall be burned."
And now they began to warm their faces from a distance, with tow that could be easily set on fire and extinguished again, fixed on the end of a cane. On feeling the heat, Sancho said,
May I die if we are not already in that fireplace, or very near it, for a good part of my beard has been singed, and I have a mind, señor, to uncover and see whereabouts we are.
Do nothing of the kind,
said Don Quixote.
Remember the true story of the licentiate Torralva, that the devils carried flying through the air riding on a stick with his eyes shut, who in 12 hours reached Rome and dismounted at Torre di Nona, which is a street of the city, and saw the whole sack and storming and the death of Bourbon, and was back in Madrid the next morning, where he gave an account of all he had seen. And he said, moreover, that as he was going through the air, the devil bade him open his eyes, and he did so, and saw himself so near the body of the moon, so it seemed to him, that he could have laid hold of it with his hand, and that he did not dare to look at the earth, lest he should be seized with giddiness. So that, Sancho, it will not do for us to uncover ourselves, for he who has us in charge will be responsible for us, and perhaps we are gaining in altitude and mounting up to enable us to descend at one swoop on the kingdom of Candy, as the shaker or falcon does on the heron, so as to seize it however high it may soar. And though it seems to us not half an hour since we left the garden, believe me, we must have traveled a great distance.
I don't know how that can be, said Sancho. All I know is that if the Señora Magallanes or Magalona was satisfied with this croup, she could not have been very tender of flesh.
The Duke, the Duchess, and all in the garden were listening to the conversation of the two heroes, and were beyond measure amused by it. And now, desirous of putting a finishing touch to this rare and well-contrived adventure, they applied a light to Clavileño's tail with some tow, and the horse, being full of squibs and crackers, immediately blew up with a prodigious noise, and brought Don Quixote and Sancho Panza to the ground half singed. By this time, the bearded band of duennas, the Trifaldi and all, had vanished from the garden, and those that remained lay stretched on the ground as if in a swoon. Don Quixote and Sancho got up rather shaken, and, looking about them, were filled with amazement at finding themselves in the same garden from which they had started, and seeing such a number of people stretched out on the ground. And their astonishment was increased when at one side of the garden they perceived a tall lance planted in the ground, and hanging from it by 2 cords of green silk a smooth white parchment, on which there was the following inscription in large gold letters: "The illustrious knight Don Quixote of La Mancha has, by merely attempting it, finished and concluded the adventure of the Countess Trifaldi, otherwise called the Distressed Duenna. Malabruno is now satisfied on every point. The chins of the duennas are now smooth and clean, and King Don Clavijo and Queen Antonomasia in their original form. And when the squirely flagellation shall have been completed, the white dove shall find herself delivered from the pestiferous gerfalcons that persecute her, and in the arms of her beloved mate. For such is the decree of the sage Merlin, arch-enchanter of enchanters." As soon as Don Quixote had read the inscription on the parchment, he perceived clearly that it referred to the disenchantment of Dulcinea, and returning hearty thanks to heaven that he had, with so little danger, achieved so grand an exploit as to restore their former complexion the countenances of those venerable duennas, he advanced towards the Duke and Duchess, who had not yet come to themselves, and taking the Duke by the hand, he said,
"Be of good cheer, worthy sir. Be of good cheer. It's nothing at all. The adventure is now over, and without any harm done, as the inscription fixed on this post shows plainly."
The Duke came to himself slowly, and like one recovering consciousness after a heavy sleep, and the Duchess and all who had fallen prostrate about the garden did the same, with such demonstrations of wonder and amazement that they would have almost persuaded one that what they pretended so adroitly in jest had happened to them in reality. The Duke read the placard with half-shut eyes, and then ran to embrace Don Quixote with open arms, declaring him to be the best knight that had ever been seen in any age. Sancho kept looking about for the distressed one, to see what her face was like without the beard, and if she was as fair as her elegant person promised. But they told him that The instant Clavileño descended flaming through the air and came to the ground, the whole band of duennas with the Trifaldi vanished, and that they were already shaved and without a stump left. The Duchess asked Sancho how he had fared on that long journey, to which Sancho replied,
I felt, señora, that we were flying through the region of fire, as my master told me, and I wanted to uncover my eyes for a bit, but my master, when I asked leave to uncover myself, would not let me. But as I have a little bit of curiosity about me, and a desire to know what is forbidden and kept from me, quietly and without anyone seeing me, I drew aside the handkerchief covering my eyes ever so little, close to my nose, and from underneath looked towards the earth, and it seemed to me that it was altogether no bigger than a grain of mustard seed, and that the men walking on it were little bigger than hazelnuts. So you may see how high we must have got to then.
To this the Duchess said, Sancho, my friend, mind what you are saying. It seems you could not have seen the earth, but only the men walking on it. For if the earth looked to you like a grain of mustard seed, and each man like a hazelnut, one man alone would have covered the whole earth.
That is true, said Sancho, but for all that I got a glimpse of a bit of one side of it and saw it all.
Take care, Sancho, said the Duchess. With a bit of one side one does not see the whole of what one looks at.
I don't understand that way of looking at things, said Sancho. I only know that your ladyship will do well to bear in mind that as we were flying by enchantment, so I might have seen the whole earth and all the men by enchantment whatever way I looked. And if you won't believe this, no more will you believe that, uncovering myself nearly to the eyebrows, I saw myself so close to the sky that there was not a palm and a half between me and it. And by everything that I can swear by, señora, it is mighty great. And it so happened we came by where the 7 goats are. And by God and upon my soul, as in my youth I was a goatherd in my own country, as soon as I saw them, I felt a longing to be among them for a little. And if I had not given way to it, I think I'd have burst. So I come and take, and what do? Without saying anything to anybody, not even to my master, softly and quietly, I got down from Clavileño, and amused myself with these goats, which are like violets, like flowers, for nigh 3/4 of an hour, and Clavileño never stirred or moved from one spot.
And while the good Sancho was amusing himself with the goats, said the Duke, how did Señor Don Quixote amuse himself? To which Don Quixote replied,
As all these things and such like occurrences are out of the ordinary course of nature, it is no wonder that Sancho says what he does. For my own part, I can only say that I did not uncover my eyes, either above or below, nor did I see sky or earth or sea or shore. It is true, I felt that I was passing through the region of the air, and even that I touched that of fire. But that we passed farther I cannot believe. For the region of fire being between the heaven of the moon and the last region of the air, we could not have reached that heaven where the 7 goats Sancho speaks of are without being burned. And as we were not burned, either Sancho is lying or Sancho is dreaming.
I am neither lying nor dreaming, said Sancho. Only ask me the tokens of those same goats, and you'll see by that whether I'm telling the truth or not.
Tell us them then, Sancho, said the Duchess.
2 of them, said Sancho, are green, 2 blood red, 2 blue, and 1 a mixture of all colors.
An odd sort of goat, that, said the Duke. In this earthly region of ours, we have no such colors. I mean, goats of no such colors.
That's very plain, said Sancho. Of course there must be a difference between the goats of heaven and the goats of earth.
Tell me, Sancho, said the Duke, did you see any he-goat among those goats?
No, señor, said Sancho, but I have heard say that none ever passed the horns of the moon.
They did not care to ask him anything more about his journey, for they saw he was in the vein to go rambling all over the heavens, giving an account of everything that went on there, without having ever stirred from the garden. Such, in short, was the end of the adventure of the distressed duenna, which gave the Duke and Duchess laughing matter not only for the time being, but for all their lives, and Sancho something to talk about for ages, if he lived so long. But Don Quixote, coming close to his ear, said to him,
Sancho, as you would have us believe what you saw in heaven, I require you to believe me as to what I saw in the cave of Montesinos. I say no more.
End of chapter 41. Recording by Brian von Diedenroth. www.vondedenroth.com.
Chapter 43 of Don Quixote, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Wrongshore. Don Quixote, Volume 2, by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Translated by John Ormsby. Chapter 42. Of the counsels which Don Quixote gave Sancho Panza before he set out to govern the island, together with other well-considered matters. The Duke and Duchess were so well pleased with the successful and droll result of the adventure of the Distressed One that they resolved to carry on the joke, seeing what a fit subject they had to deal with for making it all pass for reality. So having laid their plans and given instructions to their servants and vassals how to behave to Sancho in his government of the promised island, the next day, that following Clavileño's flight, the Duke told Sancho to prepare and get ready to go and be governor, for his islanders were already looking out for him as for the showers of May. Sancho made him an obeisance, and said, Ever since I came down from heaven, and from the top of it beheld the earth, and saw how little it is, the great desire I had to be a governor has been partly cooled in me. For what is there grand in being ruler on a grain of mustard seed? Or what dignity or authority in governing 6 men about as big as hazelnuts? For so far as I could see, there were no more on the whole earth. If your lordship would be so good as to give me ever so small a bit of heaven, were it no more than 1/2 league, I'd rather have it than the best island in the world. Recollect, Sancho, said the Duke, I cannot give a bit of heaven, no, not so much as the breadth of my nail to anyone. Rewards and favours of that sort are reserved for God alone. What I can give, I give you, and that is a real, genuine island, compact, well-proportioned, and uncommonly fertile and fruitful, where, if you know how to use your opportunities, you may, with the help of the world's riches, gain those of heaven. Well then, said Sancho, let the island come, and I'll try and be such a governor that in spite of scoundrels I'll go to heaven, and it's not from any craving to quit my own humble condition or better myself, but from the desire I have to try what it tastes like to be a governor. If you make trial of it, Sancho, said the Duke, you'll eat your fingers off after the government, so sweet a thing is it to command and be obeyed. Depend on it when your master comes to be emperor, as he will beyond a doubt from the course his affairs are taking. It will be no easy matter to wrest the dignity from him, and he will be sore and sorry at heart to have been so long without becoming one. Señor, said Sancho, it is my belief it's a good thing to be in command, if it's only over a drove of cattle. May I be buried with you, Sancho, said the Duke, but you know everything. I hope you will make as good a governor as your sagacity promises, and that is all I have to say. And now, remember, tomorrow is the day you must set out for the government of the island, and this evening they will provide you with the proper attire for you to wear, and all things requisite for your departure. Let them dress me as they like, said Sancho. However I'm dressed, I'll be Sancho Panza. That's true, said the Duke, but one's dress must be suited to the office or rank one holds, for it would not do for a jurist to dress like a soldier, or a soldier like a priest. You, Sancho, shall go partly as a lawyer, partly as a captain, for in the island I am giving you, arms are needed as much as letters, and letters as much as arms. Of letters I know but little, said Sancho, for I don't even know the ABC, but it is enough for me to have the Christus in my memory to be a good governor. As for arms, I'll handle those they give me till I drop, and then God be my help. With so good a memory, said the Duke, Sancho cannot go wrong in anything. Here Don Quixote joined them, and learning what passed, and how soon Sancho was to go to his government, he, with the duke's permission, took him by the hand, and retired to his room with him for the purpose of giving him advice as to how he was to demean himself in his office. As soon as they had entered the chamber, he closed the door after him, and almost by force made Sancho sit down beside him, and in a quiet tone thus addressed him. I give infinite thanks to heaven, friend Sancho, that before I have met with any good luck, fortune has come forward to meet thee. I, who counted upon my good fortune to discharge the recompense of thy services, find myself still waiting for advancement, while thou, before the time, and contrary to all reasonable expectation, seest thyself blessed in the fulfilment of thy desires. Some will bribe, beg, solicit, rise early, entreat, persist, without attaining the object of their suit, while another comes, and without knowing why or wherefore, finds himself invested with the place or office so many have sued for. And here it is that the common saying, there is good luck as well as bad luck in suits, applies. Thou, who to my thinking art beyond all doubt a dullard, without early rising or night watching or taking any trouble, with the mere breath of knight-errantry that has breathed upon thee, seest thyself without more ado governor of an island, as though it were a mere matter of course. This I say, Sancho, that thou attribute not the favour thou hast received to thine own merits, but give thanks to heaven, that disposes matters beneficently, and secondly, thanks to the great power the profession of knight-errantry contains in itself. With a heart, then, inclined to believe what I have said to thee, attend, my son, to thy Cato here, who would counsel thee and be thy pole star, and guide to direct and pilot thee to a safe haven out of this stormy sea, wherein thou art about to engulf thyself. For offices and great trusts are nothing else but a mighty gulf of troubles. First of all, my son, thou must fear God, for in the fear of him is wisdom, and being wise, thou canst not err in aught. Secondly, thou must keep in view what thou art, striving to know thyself, the most difficult thing to know that the mind can imagine. If thou knowest thyself, it will follow thou wilt not puff thyself up like the frog that strove to make himself as large as the ox. If thou dost, the recollection of having kept pigs in thine own country will serve as the ugly feet for thy wheel of thy folly. Well, that's the truth, said Sancho, but that was when I was a boy. Afterwards, when I was something more of a man, it was geese I kept, not pigs. But to my thinking that has nothing to do with it, for all who are governors don't come of a kingly stock. True, said Don Quixote, and for that reason those who are not of noble origin should take care that the dignity of the office they hold be accompanied by a gentle suavity, which wisely managed will save them from the sneers of malice that no station escapes. Glory in thy humble birth, Sancho, and be not ashamed of saying thou art peasant-born, for when it is seen thou art not ashamed, no one will set himself to put thee to the blush, and pride thyself rather upon being one of lowly virtue than a lofty sinner. Countless are they who, born of mean parentage, have risen to the highest dignities, pontifical and imperial, and of the truth of this I could give thee instances enough to weary thee. Remember, Sancho, if thou make virtue thy aim, and take a pride in doing virtuous actions, thou wilt have no cause to envy those who have princely and lordly ones, for blood is an inheritance, but virtue an acquisition, and virtue has in itself alone a worth that blood does not possess. This being so, if perchance any one of thy kinsfolk should come to see thee when thou art in thine island, thou art not to repel or slight him, but on the contrary to welcome him, entertain him, and make much of him, for in doing thou wilt be approved of heaven, which is not pleased that any should despise what it hath made, and wilt comply with the laws of well-ordered nature. If thou carriest thy wife with thee, and it is not well for those that administer governments to be long without their wives, teach and instruct her, and strive to smooth down her natural roughness, for all that may be gained by a wise governor may be lost and wasted by a boorish, stupid wife. If perchance thou art left a widower, a thing which may happen, and in virtue of thy office seekest a consort of higher degree, choose not one to serve thee for a hook, or for a fishing rod, or for the hood of thy won't-have-it, for verily I tell thee, for all the judge's wife receives, the husband will be held accountable at the general calling to account. where he will have repay in death fourfold, items that in life he regarded as naught. Never go by arbitrary law, which is so much favored by ignorant men who plume themselves on cleverness. Let the tears of the poor man find with thee more compassion, but not more justice, than the pleadings of the rich. Strive to lay bare the truth as well amid the promises and presents of the rich man as amid the sobs and entreaties of the poor. When equity may and should be brought into play, press not the utmost rigor of the law against the guilty, for the reputation of the stern judge stands not higher than that of the compassionate. If perchance thou permittest the staff of justice to swerve, let it be not by the weight of a gift, but by that of mercy. If it should happen thee to give judgment in the cause of one who is thine enemy, turn thy thoughts away from thy injury, and fix them on the justice of the case. Let not thine own passion blind thee in another man's cause, for the errors thou wilt thus commit will be most frequently irremediable, or if not, only to be remedied at the expense of thy good name and even of thy fortune. If any handsome woman come to seek justice of thee, turn away thine eyes from her tears, and thine ears from her lamentations, and consider deliberately the merits of her demand, if thou wouldst not have thy reason swept away by her weeping, and thy rectitude by her sighs. Abuse not by word him whom thou hast to punish in deed, for the pain of punishment is enough for the unfortunate, without the addition of thine objurgations. Bear in mind that the culprit who comes under thy jurisdiction is but a miserable man, subject to all the propensities of our depraved nature, and so far as may be in thy power, show thyself lenient and forbearing, for though the attributes of God are all equal, to our eyes that of mercy is brighter and loftier than that of justice. If thou followest these precepts and rules, Sancho, thy days will be long, thy fame eternal, thy reward abundant, thy felicity unutterable. Thou wilt marry thy children as thou wouldst, they and thy grandchildren will bear titles, thou wilt live in peace and concord with all men, and when life draws to a close, death will come to thee in calm and ripe old age, and the light and loving hands of thy great-grandchildren will close thine eyes. What I have thus far addressed to thee are instructions for the adornment of thy mind. Listen now to those which tend to that of the body. End of chapter 42. Chapter 43. Of the second set of counsels Don Quixote gave Sancho Panza. Who, hearing the foregoing discourse of Don Quixote, would not have set him down for a person of great good sense and greater rectitude of purpose? But as has been frequently observed in the course of this great history, he only talked nonsense when he touched on chivalry, and in discussing all other subjects showed that he had a clear and unbiased understanding, so that at every turn his acts gave the lie to his intellect, and his intellect to his acts. But in the case of these second counsels that he gave Sancho, he showed himself to have a lively turn of humor, and displayed conspicuously his wisdom and also his folly. Sancho listened to him with the deepest attention, and endeavored to fix his counsels in his memory, like one who meant to follow them, and by their means bring the full promise of his government to a happy issue. Don Quixote then went on to say, with regard to the mode in which thou shouldst govern thy person and thy house, Sancho, the first charge I have to give thee is to be clean, and to cut thy nails, not letting them grow as some do, whose ignorance makes them fancy that long nails are an ornament to their hands, as if those excrescences they neglect to cut were nails, and not the talons of a lizard-catching kestrel, a filthy and unnatural abuse. Go not ungirt and loose, Sancho, for disordered attire is a sign of an unstable mind, unless indeed the slovenliness and slackness is to be set down to craft, as was the common opinion in the case of Julius Caesar. Ascertain cautiously what thy office may be worth, and if it will allow thee to give liveries to thy servants, give them respectable and serviceable, rather than showy and gay ones, and divide them between thy servants and the poor. That is to say, if thou canst clothe 6 pages, clothe 3, and 3 poor men, and thus thou wilt have pages for heaven and pages for earth. The vainglorious never think of this new mode of giving liveries. Eat not garlic nor onions, lest they find out thy boorish origin by the smell. Walk slowly and speak deliberately, but not in such a way as to make it seem thou art listening to thyself, for all affectation is bad. Dine sparingly, and sup more sparingly still, for the health of the whole body is forged in the workshop of the stomach. Be temperate in drinking, bearing in mind that wine in excess keeps neither secrets nor promises. Take care, Sancho, not to chew on both sides, and not to eruct in anybody's presence. "Eruct?" said Sancho. "I don't know what that means." "To eruct, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "means to belch, and that is one of the filthiest words in the Spanish language, though a very expressive one, and therefore nice folk have had recourse to the Latin, and instead of belch, they say eruct, and instead of belches, say eructations, and if some do not understand these terms, it matters little, for custom will bring them into use in the course of time, so that they will be readily understood. This is the way a language is enriched. Custom and the public are all powerful there." "In truth, señor," said Sancho, "one of the counsels and cautions I mean to bear in mind shall be this, not to belch, for I'm constantly doing it." "Eruct, Sancho, not belch," said Don Quixote. "Eruct, I shall say henceforth, and I swear not to forget it," said Sancho. "Likewise, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "thou must not mingle such a quantity of proverbs in thy discourse as thou dost, for though proverbs are short maxim, thou dost drag them in so often by the head and shoulders that they savour more of nonsense than of maxims." "God alone can cure that," said Sancho, "for I have more proverbs in me than a book, and when I speak they come so thick together into my mouth that they fall to fighting among themselves to get out. That's why my tongue lets fly the first that come, though they may not be pat to the purpose. But I'll take henceforward to use such as befit the dignity of my office, for in a house where there's plenty, supper is soon cooked, and he who binds does not wrangle, and the bell ringer's in a safe berth, and giving and keeping require brains." "That's it, Sancho," said Don Quixote. "Pack, tack, string proverbs together. Nobody is hindering thee. My mother beats me, and I go on with my tricks. I am bidding thee avoid proverbs, and here in a second thou hast shot out a whole litany of them, which have as much to do with what we are talking about as over the hills of Ubeda. Mind, Sancho, I do not say that a proverb aptly brought in is objectionable, but to pile up and string together proverbs at random makes conversation dull and vulgar. When thou ridest on horseback, do not go lolling with thy body on the back of the saddle, nor carry thy legs stick or sticking out from the horse's belly, nor yet sit so loosely that one would suppose thou wert on dapple, for the seat on a horse makes gentlemen of some and grooms of others. Be moderate in thy sleep, for he who does not rise early does not get the benefit of the day. And remember, Sancho, diligence is the mother of good fortune, and indolence, its opposite, never yet attained the object of an honest ambition. The last counsel I will give thee now, though it does not tend to bodily improvement, I would have thee carry carefully in thy memory, for I believe it will be no less useful to thee than those I have given thee already, and it is this: never engage in a dispute about families, at least in the way of comparing them with one another, for necessarily one of those compared will be better than the other, and thou wilt be hated by the one thou hast disparaged, and get nothing in any shape from the one thou hast exalted. Thy attire shall be hose of full length, a long jerkin, and a cloak a trifle longer, loose breeches by no means, for they are becoming neither for gentlemen nor for governors. For the present, Sancho, this is all that has occurred to me to advise thee. As time goes by and occasions arise, my instructions shall follow, if thou take care to let me know how thou art circumstanced." "Señor," said Sancho, "I see well enough that all these things your worship has said to me are good, holy, and profitable, but what use will they be to me if I don't remember one of them? To be sure that about not letting my nails grow, and marrying again if I have the chance, will not slip out of my head, but all that other hash, muddle, and jumble, I don't and can't recollect any more of it than of last year's clouds, so it must be given me in writing, for though I can't either read or write, I'll give it to my confessor to drive it into me and remind me of it whenever it is necessary." "Ah, sinner that I am," said Don Quixote, "how bad it looks in governors not to know how to read or write. For let me tell thee, Sancho, when a man knows not how to read, or is left-handed, it argues one of two things, either that he was the son of exceedingly mean and lowly parents, or that he himself was so incorrigible and ill-conditioned that neither good company nor good teaching could make any impression on him. It is a great defect that thou labourest under, and therefore I would have thee learn at any rate to sign thy name. I can sign my name well enough, said Sancho, for when I was steward of the brotherhood in my village, I learned to make certain letters, like the marks on bales of goods, which they told me made out my name. Besides, I can pretend my right hand is disabled, and make someone else sign for me, for there's a remedy for everything except death. And as I shall be in command and hold the staff, I can do as I like. Moreover, he who has the alcalde for his father, and I'll be governor, and that's higher than alcalde. Only come and see. Let them make light of me and abuse me. They'll come for wool and go back shorn. Whom God loves, his house is known to him. The silly sayings of the rich pass for saws in the world. And as I'll be rich, being a governor, and at the same time generous, as I mean to be, no fault will be seen in me. Only make yourself honey, and the flies will suck you. As much as thou hast, so much art thou worth, as my grandmother used to say, and thou canst have no revenge of a man of substance. Oh, God's curse upon thee, Sancho! Here exclaimed Don Quixote. 60,000 devils fly away with thee and thy proverbs. For the last hour thou hast been stringing them together and inflicting the pangs of torture on me with every one of them. Those proverbs will bring thee to the gallows one day, I promise thee. Thy subjects will take the government from thee, or there will be revolts among them. Tell me, where dost thou pick them up, thou booby? How dost thou apply them, thou blockhead? For with me, to utter one and make it apply properly, I have to sweat and labour as if I were digging. By God, master mine, said Sancho, your worship is making a fuss about very little. Why the devil should you be vexed if I make use of what is my own? And I have got nothing else, nor any other stock in trade, except proverbs and more proverbs. And here are 3 just this instant come into my head, pat to the purpose and like pears in a basket. But I won't repeat them, for sage silence is called Sancho. That, Sancho, thou art not, said Don Quixote, for not only art thou not sage silence, but thou art pestilent prate and perversity. Still, I would like to know what 3 proverbs have just now come into thy memory, for I have been turning over mine own, and it is a good one, and none occurs to me. What can be better, said Sancho, than never put thy thumbs between 2 back teeth, and to get out of my house, and what do you want with my wife? There is no answer. And whether the pitcher hits a stove, or the stove a pitcher, it's a bad business for a pitcher. All which fit to a hair. For no one should quarrel with his governor, or him in authority over him, because he will come off the worst, as he does who puts his finger between 2 back, and if they are not back teeth, it makes no difference so long as they are teeth. And to whatever the governor may say, there's no answer, any more than to get out of my house, and what do you want with my wife? And then, as for that about the stone and the pitcher, a blind man could see that, so that he who sees the mote in another's eye had need to see the beam in his own, that it be not said of himself, the dead woman was frightened at the one with her throat cut. And your worship knows well that the fool knows more in his own house than the wise man in another's. Nay, Sancho, said Don Quixote, the fool knows nothing, either in his own house or in anybody else's, for no wise structure of any sort can stand on a foundation of folly. But let us say no more about it, Sancho, for if thou governest badly, thine will be the fault, and mine the shame. But I comfort myself with having done my duty in advising thee as earnestly and as wisely as I could, and thus I am released from my obligations and my promise. God guide thee, Sancho, and govern thee in my government, and deliver me from the misgiving I have that thou wilt turn the whole island upside down, a thing I might easily prevent by explaining to the Duke what thou art, and telling him that all that fat little person of thine is nothing else but a sackful of proverbs and sauciness. Señor, said Sancho, if your worship thinks I'm not fit for this government, I give it up on the spot, for the mere black of the nail of my soul is dearer to me than my whole body, and I can live just as well, simple Sancho, on bread and onions, as governor, on partridges and capons, and what's more, while we're asleep we're all equal, great and small, rich and poor. But if your worship looks into it, you will see it was your worship alone that put me onto this business of governing, for I know no more about the government of islands than a buzzard, and if there's any reason to think that because of my being a governor the devil will get hold of me, I'd rather go Sancho to heaven than governor to hell." "By God, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "for those last words thou hast uttered alone, I consider thou deservest to be governor of 1,000 islands. Thou hast good natural instincts, without which no knowledge is worth anything. Commend thyself to God, and try not to swerve in the pursuit of thy main object. I mean, always make it thy aim and fixed purpose to do right in all matters that come before thee, for heaven always helps good intentions. And now let us go to dinner, for I think my lord and lady are waiting for us." End of chapter 43. Recording by Wrongshore, Los Angeles.